The monastery of Tatev is a virtual pearl of Sunik, one of the 15 historic provinces of ancient Armenia. It is Sunik that is called the uttermost of all the gifts and grants for the Sisakan family by Stepanos Obelan, an Armenian historian of the 14th century. In 301, Armenia was the first country to recognise Christianity as a state religion. Monasteries and churches emerged instead of the destroyed pagan temples, and the Tatev Monastery was one of them, erected on the ruins of an ancient heathen temple. Later, the monastery was used as the residence of the metropolitan. Once upon a time, the monastery was full of life. In 839, the prior of Tatev Monastery, future Bishop David II, bought from the noble Prince Felipe the village of Artsiv, together with its hills and fields, meadows and grasslands. Soon the monastery was joined by the seminary of Sunik with its professors and seminarians. Thus the monastery became the spiritual centre of the area. At the end of the 14th century, Ovanes Vorodnetsi and the princes of Obelan founded a university there that survived with some intervals for about 70 years. This institution of higher education had 3 schools, namely the School of Calligraphy and Miniature, that of Music, and finally the School of Philosophy and Theology. The students were not more than 80 at a time, but the place was so famous that sometimes it would host up to 1,000 students together with the monks. At the western and southern walls there were 2-storey residential blocks. The vaulted cells were separated from the lower floor, with the flooring supported by the heavy beams. Some cells had balconies looking onto the abyss of the mountain. A passage connected the living quarters with the kitchen, where modest meals of the monks were cooked in a huge stone oven. Water was taken from the spring located near the Gate Church. Such arrangement was made in the mid-18th century, while earlier the crystal water was taken directly from the river. There is a local belief that once a snake was scooped into the bucket together with the river water. A monastery raven saw it, and dashing into the bucket it killed the snake. However, the snake managed to bite the brave bird, and the thankful monks buried the raven on the way to the monastery. The rocks supporting the monastery walls had numerous secret storages hidden in the narrow rocky gaps. People and weaponry could be kept there. In the northern part there were stables. Armenia was well into horse breeding since the antiquity that was under surveillance of the governors. When the King Darius ordered to cut out the lists of the lands paying tribute to Persia, Armenia was on the list. However, the tribute paid by Armenia besides gold and silver included horses. The Armenian horses were appreciated everywhere, as much as the precious metals and were used as a sort of currency. Almost 3,000 years ago, Menua, the king of Urartu, on his stallion Otsibi, jumped for 22 elbows, that is more than 9 metres. This fantastic jump was witnessed by the judges, of which the entry was made in wedge writing on the stone in the wall of an ancient church near Lake Van. Earlier there was the racecourse of the Armenian princes there. When you arrive at the gate of the monastery, do not hurry to enter this sanctum of faith and wisdom. Take your time to come up to the very edge of the cliff and, holding your breath, to look down to see the Tatevi Metsenapad, another spiritual cloister of Sunik, located at the very bottom of the clove on the bank of the Varatan River. The high walls of the cloister are surrounded by thick forest. Here is the entrance to Tatev Monastery. It is very unusual for Armenia. The first to welcome the visitors there is the Gate Church of the Holy Blessed Virgin. It is located above the huge defence walls, which is not characteristic of the Armenian sacred architecture. The church was built in the 11th century. The dome of the Gate Church is crowned with the cross guarding the gate of Tatev. Silent is the monastery yard. To the left from the entrance there surges the church of St. Peter and St. Paul. It is the main and most ancient construction of the complex, built between 895 and 906. The appearance of the church is severe and laconic, reproducing the dome basilicas of the 7th century. The western part hosts annexes which are distinct from the typical dome basilica. The corners of the annexes served as abutments for the dome, However, in the 12th century, the dome collapsed after a huge earthquake. In 930, the interior walls of the church, the main cathedral of Sunik Principality, were decorated with frescoes. Unfortunately, only a few fragments of them have survived. According to Stepanos Orbelan, the frescoes were made by painters from afar, invited by Bishop Akop. A local painter also assisted them since the church is very vast. All the inscriptions and texts were created in Armenian by an experienced painter. And the faces of the characters depicted on the frescoes are Eastern. Many ornaments migrated to the church walls from the earlier Armenian miniatures, sophisticated carvings and ceramics. The main apse had the representation of Jesus Christ sitting on a throne. Out of the whole fresco, only the fragment with his feet have survived. The northern wall of the church had the scenes of nativity depicted there. The remaining fragments are representation of ablution, of the newborn, and the joyous shepherds listening to the angels. The western wall of the church was covered with an enormous fresco depicting the doomsday. Now only several fragments remain. Generally, the Armenian architecture of the 7th century is free from any superfluous details. Therefore, the facades of the Church of St. Peter and St. Paul are smooth. Only the eastern facade has 2 triangular niches finished with thin, ornate eyebrows. 4 of them represent human faces, and looking at them are the snakes with their stings stuck out. Historically in Sunik, the snake is believed to be the protector of the house and home. The Armenians do believe that peace and happiness will forever leave the house of the one who killed a snake. While the faces on the eastern relief are rather schematic, the carver definitely tried to portray someone in the frescoes on the northern wall, and according to Stepanos Orbelan, these are the portraits of the founders of the church. Near the southern wall of the Tatev temple, resting on a step pedestal, there is an 8-metre-high pillar gavazan crowned with hachkar, the stone with a cross on it. Gavazan, a stick in Armenian, is connected with the worshipping of Phallus, practiced in pagan Armenia. Interesting enough, but in some areas of the country, the word gavazan is still used for the male organ. The Armenian ladies unable to bear a child would come to Tatev to worship gavazan. They would light up candles, kiss the pillar, and pray to give their husbands the strength of the stone to bestow them with the long-awaited child. All this time the pillar kept swinging. This is the geniality of the ancient architect who managed to build a swinging pillar. A jolt was enough for gavazan to start swinging. Gavazan was also used as a seismic detector to give the monks signs of coming earthquakes. And besides, gavazan would start moving at the enemies approaching Tatev, brought into motion by the pace of the soldiers. Gavazan survived after devastating the temple. The St. Gregor Church, the porch and campanile were brought to ruins. The mystery of this seismic detector remains, despite attempts in the last century by Soviet architects to find out what makes it work. But in fact, their failed attempt made it swing less. At the south, the Cathedral Church is jointed by the Church of St. Gregor, the enlightener of the Armenian people, dating back to the 13th century. The church is located on the spot of an early one devastated by an earthquake. The earlier church was built in the 9th century by Felipe, the Prince of Sunik. In the 11th century, the Arab troops entered Tatev and burnt the monastery to ashes. In 1046, the St. Gregor Church was restored, but was ruined by an earthquake less than 100 years later. Near the gavazan there is a tomb of the Grigor Tatevatsi, the tutor of Tatev University, canonised by the Armenian Church. There is a vault over the tomb, decorated with ornaments and embossed crosses. There one can see numerous prayers and honours from the grateful students. After Tatevatsi's death, the university survived another quarter of a century, until 1434, when the cavalry of Tomalenson's son attacked the monastery and killed the monks.